Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sela Social Studies. Alright, so today we're going to be covering the big three progressive presidents. There were three presidents who are associated with the progressive era, and they are those gentlemen right there. You have Teddy Roosevelt, the cousin of Franklin Roosevelt, the later president. You have William Howard Taft, the gentleman in the middle, and at the bottom you have Woodrow Wilson. These three men had sort of similar but mostly different ideas on how to reform the nation. People in the United States labeled this or believed this to be a time of what we call big government. The idea that the government had its hands on a lot of business and a lot of things that are put in place, plans, laws that are put in place for the American people. This idea of laissez-faire government, this hands-off type of government, is over. No longer do the presidents allow businesses like during the Gilded Age be allowed to just flourish and do whatever they want to do, use laborers as interchangeable parts, and just, let businesses just go sky high and let the very few get rich and the very large amount of laborers be poor. So this idea of laissez-faire business practice in America is over. The government is now going to have its hands on business, and they are going to make these changes to these businesses and people's lives. So the first president we're going to cover was the first president in the turn of the century, Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. And Roosevelt has a plan which he calls the square deal. Now we know that a square has four corners, and his square deal really involves three major components, and we're going to cover these components, and they're called the 3 C's, but I'm going to add another C on there to make it a square so you'll remember. And he uses his square deal policy first off to help end the coal miners' strike in 1902. He basically threatened that the government will take over these mines unless the mine managers agreed to an arbitration. And you might have heard that in the sports world today, but it's basically a formal process of settling strikes, disputes with strikers. Today, arbitration is used usually for players who want more salary. The team gets with the player, they decide, they argue, they negotiate or settle disputes between the player and Major League Baseball. Teddy Roosevelt's square deal, like I said, four corners in a square, but his is really a triangle, and his triangles are called the 3 C's. I'm going to throw my other C in here for you to make it a square deal. First corner of the square, Teddy Roosevelt was a crusader. He was a guy who really pushed forward a lot of ideas. He was a man that, in this picture right here up on top, he was wearing glasses. There are pictures throughout Teddy Roosevelt's younger adulthood where he didn't want to wear glasses because he thought it would make him look less manly. Teddy Roosevelt was a man's man. He would go out and hunt. He would be in the forests. He would be in these big areas of land tent camping. I mean, if he was a man's man, he was a frontiersman, and he was a crusader. He made things happen. That's the first C. Second C, he wanted to control the corporations. He wanted to help consumers, and that's actually the second C, but he wanted to help consumers by breaking up these big monopolies that came out during the Gilded Age, like Standard Oil. Control these corporations, break them apart to help the consumers. That's the second C, control the corporations. The third C, helping consumers. That goes along with that first C. If he breaks up these monopolies, now instead of having one area that sells one product or one business that sells product and they can sell it for any price, now he can break them up and make competition. That's important. This competition of the corporations helps the consumer. All these C's I'm throwing out at you. So he controls the corporations. That's his first one, right? Or the second one. I say he's a crusader. He controls the corporations by breaking up monopolies, and he helps consumers by breaking up these monopolies. He sits there, and now competition drives down prices. The third thing is that he's well known for, his legacy of what he's known for is his conservation of the United States. He creates the national forest system. He creates numerous, actually he more than doubles the amount of national park system in the United States. He's a conservative. He conserves the land. He preserves the land. He conserves the land. It's almost an interchangeable idea. One person wants to use the land for the best of its purpose. The other wants to use just save the land. Teddy Roosevelt was kind of like he wanted to preserve and conserve the land. So remember that about his plan. It's the 3 C's, but we're going to call it the 4. He's a crusader. That's mine. He controls the corporations. He helps consumers, and he conserved the United States of America. During Roosevelt's presidency, we have a muckraker that came out who influenced Teddy Roosevelt, none other than Upton Sinclair, and his book The Jungle. And we'll get into The Jungle later, but really The Jungle opened up Roosevelt's eyes, and he's like, holy mackerel, is the meat packing industry in Chicago really like that? So because of The Jungle, he forces Congress to enact these meat inspection laws, passed the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906, which prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transport of mislabeled and contaminated food and drugs. Well, basically, when we cover The Jungle, you'll see what that's all about. And Roosevelt persuaded Congress to regulate railroad shipping rates. So now that means that the government's stepping in on the railroad and making the railroad not charge as much as they were charging people, that monopolistic railroad. Teddy Roosevelt was also the first president to successfully use that 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act to break up monopoly. This Sherman Antitrust Act was a law put in place that prohibited businesses from trying to destroy its competition. That's why it's called an Antitrust Act. They outlawed monopolies and trusts. Remember, a monopoly and a trust is a business that controls all of one sector of that business, eliminating all of its competition and making it so they can direct prices and control the economy in that area. Because of his dislikes, because of Roosevelt's dislikes of trust, he's actually given the nickname the trust buster. However, Roosevelt wouldn't bust all trusts in the United States. Roosevelt would only bust the trusts that he believed were bad. Roosevelt actually believed that some trusts were good because at least you got a good product out of that corporation or that company. And the public largely supported this expansion of federal regulatory powers because they finally said somebody's stepping up and they're taking control of these businesses, they're making things happen, and they are protecting us, the consumer. Here again, Roosevelt, remember, for his conservation efforts. Here's a little bit more deeper in it. He strongly supported this conservation, which was the protection of natural resources and its nature and the environment. He considered it a very important national priority. Here we go. Some preservationists wanted to protect nature to save its beauty, and some preservationists wanted to make sure the nation was used and these natural resources were used properly and efficiently. Here's some of the things that Roosevelt did. He responded by strengthening the government's Forest Service and national parks. He added 150 million acres of public land to the Forest Service to regulate the use of forest resources by businesses. He doubled the number of national parks to preserve national beauty. He created 18 national monuments and started 51 bird sanctuaries. Then the next president we have is William Howard Taft. William Howard Taft was kind of like Roosevelt's protege. He was a little bit more cautious than Roosevelt was when he was talking about reform and regulations. Progressives were kind of disappointed in Taft's approach to reform because they really saw that they made progress under Roosevelt. Taft didn't like any trusts. Taft busted actually more trusts than Roosevelt. I want to say that He busted about 80 something when Roosevelt was only about 40 something, but he didn't like any trusts if they were good or bad for the American consumers. So Taft signed the Payne-Aldrich tariff and tax in 1909, which wound up raising prices for consumers, and that was opposed by many progressives because remember, we're trying to help consumers at this time. President Taft was the only president in history to serve as the president and the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And just a little bit of a rumor has it that William Howard Taft was so large that he got stuck in the White House bathtub. It's not true because they actually put in a bigger bathtub for William Howard Taft. So we have an election of 1912 in which Taft is running for re-election for a second term. Roosevelt was really mad at Taft. He was angry at Taft because of what he was doing to these trusts and not really following through with Roosevelt's plans and policies about controlling corporations, helping consumers. That was the big thing. He felt that Taft didn't help consumers enough. So you have Taft running. You have Theodore Roosevelt, who's running again in what you'd call the Progressive Party, or what he calls the Bull Moose Party, against Taft. And whenever you have a former person, in this case, Taft was a Republican and Roosevelt was a Republican. And every time you have two Republicans, or one that was a Republican and one's a big Republican, if they both run for president at the same time, it's bad news for you because you're going to wind up splitting that Republican vote. And in this case, that's what happened. Woodrow Wilson runs on the Democratic ticket, and Eugene V. Debs runs as a socialist. He's out of the picture right away. It's really between the big three. And because you divided up that Republican vote, now you have Woodrow Wilson, who was elected President of the United States in 1912. He wins by this wide margin because, like I said, you cannot split one party vote and expect to win. So Wilson has a plan to reform the nation, and it's called the New Freedom. He introduced the modern income tax made possible by the 16th Amendment and the 17th Amendment, which is the voting for senators. This all happens under Woodrow Wilson. He addressed the banking reform with the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, which creates the Federal Reserve System that creates a national banking system for the United States. He is a controller of the banks. Wilson believed that controlling the banks was going to be good for the nation. He also pushed for laws for big business. He pushed for the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914, which strengthens laws against monopolies. And in 1914, he created the Federal Trade Commission, and this commission has the power to investigate and punish unfair trade practices. So during the first part of the 1900s, you have three big hitter presidents who are progressive. You have Theodore Roosevelt, the crusader, helping consumers, controlling businesses, and conserving the nation. And then you have his protege, William Howard Taft, a Republican. Remember, not as progressive as Roosevelt. Roosevelt gets mad, runs against him, and then you have Wilson. And Wilson takes us to World War I. But you have to remember, all three are progressives. All three try to control some part of the economy, especially with Wilson when he's trying to control the banks in the United States of America.